So, this is our last evening together. I'm a little saddened. Do y'all remember from way back? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? We come from our parents, y'all. Just kidding, right? We come from the earth, right? And whether you want to talk about from what your parents eat when they make you and that you come from the earth, or that God scooped us down, right? We come from the earth. And what did God do that makes us who we are, so unique? Give you a clue. God breathed into us, right? Not so much a hurricane, but more just God breathed into us, that God created us in God's image and breathed the very life of God's own spirit, God's very breath into our lungs, right? And then we heard the flood story. Does God take that dirt? Maybe we're a little broken. Maybe we're a little messed up. Does God just throw us into the river? What does God do here in these waters? In the waters of baptism. Remember what's up? God reshapes us. God takes those scraps that are left over after a potter makes a bowl or a bowl collapses in on itself and re-kneads us, works through the waters of baptism. Just a little bit of water in God's hands working in our lives, kneading us, making us, forming us into the vessel that God has made us to be, right? And God is always reshaping us, working through us. What was the next week? Do y'all remember? I can drag the kids up here again. Do y'all remember that? Do I need to drag the children? What's up, Jenna? You got it? Yeah, so after the flood, God says, never again. I won't ever throw you in the river. Do you remember what happened the next week when maybe you weren't here that week because I did a children's sermon and you weren't here and I was looking for you. That's okay. Do y'all remember Pharaoh, Max? Where's Max? Ooh. All right, so right that Pharaoh was up here and that we run through these waters, right? That the Israelites ran through the waters of the flood, the Red Sea split open, and they're able to make their way through. And what happens to the Egyptians that are coming after them? They drown, right? And in our lives, in our existence, coming after us is all this sin and death and brokenness, right? And in these waters, that drowns. That's what we're given in the gift of baptism. God is remaking us. God is drowning out the sin and drowning out our brokenness and reshaping us. And then last week we got to hear about what? Do y'all remember? God gives us a new... See, I'm also gauging how good my sermons are. If you can't remember them, then I just assume that they're awful and I got to work more on them next year, right? So God gives us a new heart. That God says, you know what, you might have a hard time feeling. You might have gone away from my ordinances and my decrees. You may have a hard time caring for your neighbor or even caring for me. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to reach into your chest. I'm going to pull open your chest cavity, and I'm going to give you a heart that looks like mine, that feels like mine, that is like mine. And so that what I feel, you feel. And so that you care for your neighbor and that you care just for me, right? So that God gives us a heart so that we can be for God, right? To take care of God and to take care, right, of our neighbor. This evening, we get to hear the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And when God puts a new heart into us, when we live for God alone, that can get us in trouble. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in trouble because they will not bow before O king. They will not bow before the idols that O king has set up. They won't bow before the golden statue. Today in our lives, there are gods that demand our attention. And I don't mean like the God, I mean like false gods. So this is kind of a Q&A sermon. I'm going to talk to you all a lot. And if you want to talk back, there are no wrong answers. Well, there might be some wrong answers, but there are probably no wrong answers. So what are some of the gods that demand our attention today, that say bow to us, right? At the sound of the horn, the drums, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, and the entire musical ensemble, what are the gods that try to pull us away? Yeah, Brandon. Money tries to do it, right? Right? When I can't find my wallet, I usually keep it in this pocket, but these pants are stitched closed on that side. I don't know why. Anyway, you didn't need to know that. Right? When this becomes more sacred when this becomes more sacred and important than God, right? This becomes an idol. What are some of the other things? Is what? Social media, right? We can spend hours clicking on the internet, and we can even forget about, who created it all, right? And technology can be a lovely gift, but it can also be something that we just get sucked into. I tell you the truth. Last Tuesday? It was one of the days that I was able to take a middle block off, and I sat down and I started playing Halo. And 4 hours later, I realized that all I had done was play video games for 4 hours straight. Like, it can literally take your life, right? Are there other things that come to mind? Busyness. What others? Jobs, things, just like possessions, right? When this starts to control who we are, like, how nice is my car? How nice are my pants? Like, how do I have a really cool TV? Is my TV bigger than my neighbor's? Is my car bigger than my neighbor's? Does my car go faster than my neighbor's? Like, do I have the coolest up-to-date tractor? I don't know. Like, does that matter, right? Are there people who brag about how awesome their tractors are? Are there?
Just the color.
This is the color, right? No, nobody comes to me and tells me those things. So, right? And so that there are gods that pull us, or that false gods that try to steal our attention, right? And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remind us that there is one God. There is one God who created us all. There is one God who redeemed us in the waters of baptism, who watches over us and protects us from sin and death in the waters of baptism. And glory, honor, and praise go to that God alone, the God alone. And that when this stuff starts to get in the way, that we are called to turn and return back to God, right, and Jesus Christ. And so for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and I think for us, it comes with consequences. People look at you funny. I don't know if you've noticed this. Do y'all tell people you go to church often? Do you like people look at you funny when? Do you tell people how much offering you put in the offering plate? People look at you funny if you did. Like, why in the world would you put money in the offering plate at church? Like, why in the world would you go to church rather than playing on social media? If you've got so much stuff to do, busyness is running your life, why would you go spend 3 hours doing Sunday school with your kids? Like, why is that even important? There are consequences. There are consequences for devoting yourself to God, right? I mean, there are. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego find themselves in a tough position because they're trying to figure out how to live and still keep their beliefs. And I think that we are faced with the same thing today. We're trying to figure out how to live in this world today and keep our beliefs, to keep it about God who created us from the very dust of the earth, right? And so the king brings Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before him and says, you know what? I'll give you one more chance to give into the pressures of how I do life. And if you don't, I'm going to take away your livelihood and I'm going to kill you, right? And I love Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's answer. And I'm even read it because I don't even want to butcher it. They tell him, and this really ticks off the king. I like that too. But it says, "We have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let God deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods and that we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." What they tell king is, you know what? God might save us. Maybe God will. If God saves us, God will save us, right? When the world comes after you for your livelihood and for your life because you keep your beliefs towards God, that's our response. Maybe God will save us. If God saves us, God saves us. But if not, we will still only worship the one God. Come hell or high water, we will only worship the one God. It reminds me so much, and I want to read from this as well. It comes out of Romans, the 14th chapter, and I bookmarked it so I could find it quickly. It reminds me a lot of, we do not live to ourselves, we do not die to ourselves. If we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. That's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are telling, O king. Whether you kill us or whether we live, we belong to God. You can never take that away from us. Whatever you hold over your head, whatever you think you can hold over our head by threatening us with a furnace of blazing fire, we are the Lord's. Come better or worse, we are God's. And it sounds a lot like what Jesus tells Pontius Pilate. Again, like with these authority figures, right? With Pontius Pilate, Pilate says, "Do you not know that I have the power to let you go or to crucify you?" This is out of John. It says, and Jesus says, "That power was given into your hands by God, and I wouldn't be here without it." It's paraphrased. Right? Whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. And so we are the Lord's, right? And so the king, it ticks him off. And so they throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire. And maybe Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego burn up in the fire. Or maybe they don't. In this case, God shows up in the midst of it, and not even their tunics, their clothes, their hair even smells of fire, that God delivers them. Because here's the thing, that God goes wherever we go. That God is there in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the hurt. And I found myself wondering as I read this text, and I love this text. I found myself wondering as I read this text, did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, did they see the fourth person in the fire? Did they see God in the fire with them? Did they? I mean, Scripture doesn't say. We know that O King is able to see it. O King sees that they're not burned. Does Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego see that God is with them? And I wonder that same question for us in the midst of the fire, in the midst of the torment, amidst the pain, in midst of just the chaos that comes in life when we live only to God and for God alone, do we see that God is there by our side? Yesterday, I found myself at the Odo County Sheriff's Office, and I won't tell you why. But I found myself at the Odo County Sheriff's Office, and I was sitting there in their waiting room, and in came a gentleman and his daughter. And I just, you hear everything in there. It's not a big room if you've ever been inside their office. And it was, do y'all remember the accident from like 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, out here on the bridge? It was the guy that was airlifted out. The last thing that I had known was that he was airlifted out and not doing very well. And it was funny to be there at the same time that he came in. And he was okay. He was walking. And I was talking to the officer after. He's like, who are you and why are you here? And I was telling him, I'm a pastor from North Branch. I'm a pastor from that church that's just a little bit north. I was like, and some of us were praying for that. We didn't know who, but praying for that guy. And he's like, it's because of your prayers that he's alive. He shouldn't be right now. He's like, it's probably only because of you and your congregation that guy's alive. Do we see God walking in the fire with us? Do we see God in the midst supporting us and carrying us and keeping us from harm, watching over our clothes and our backs and our kids, right? Watching over strangers that we don't even know. Do we see God in the midst? And this story ends with the king saying, "Blessed be the God of O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." It is by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faith lived out that the king comes to belief in the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Jesus, right? It is by our belief, by our faith, uncompromising in the face of so many things that the world tells us to bow down to, that God is revealed in truth, that God's presence by our side is shown to others, and that others come to belief in who Jesus is and how God is always with us. And we get to see that in Holy Week coming up, that God goes to the cross for us, that God is by our side time and time again, that God walks with us even still in this life. Amen? Amen. Amen.